So in order to be able to keep going, you have to recognize that sometimes change happens real slowly, but you got to keep with it. Yes, ma'am.
I can say, as a student of the 1960s, and what we felt then and how we feel now, I graduated from Wayne State University, and
What year? Oh, probably shouldn't ask that.
it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I graduated in 1969, 1970. So I was really very involved. But I think at that particular time, we were very idealistic.
Mm-hmm.
That was one thing. But fundamentally, as you say, that you have to become the change that you want to see, so I did that. But I think what we didn't realize was how strong the opposition was. That is the issue. How deep-rooted and how strong capitalism and all of the isms are.
And that's why persistence is absolutely essential.
Well, persistence is essential, but it's a little deeper than persistence. It's you know, it's like I said, it's a quite. I mean, we made so many, we had to strong impact, and then after we had the reversal of affirmative action, all of the other programs that indeed somehow gave people consciousness, but once those policies were reversed, all of those issues were reversed, then people, not everyone, but a significant core reverted back to the old position. So,
Well, that, one of the things, and this is probably a constant problem of being a young revolutionary. I can't speak to being a young revolutionary these days, but yeah, right. You know, I mean, it's a young person's game. But one of the problems that I think all young revolutionaries face is the idea that if you can accomplish the change once, that there's not going to be any backsliding, which is what you were talking about a minute ago. I mean, there are people at all ends of the political spectrum, and so, you know, folks on the left, you know, who, and I think it'd be fair to call Black Studies advocates somewhat on the left, were definitely on the left, were pushing their perspective. Well, of course, folks who are taking opposite perspectives, we're going to push back, and we've been seeing that since the 1960s. One of you know, we've been moving politically to the right, in large part in reaction to not just Black Studies, but to the anti-war movement, Vietnam War movement, and so forth. The other student protests. There was so much anger at that you know, we've continued to move rightward politically, and so that is, you know, on one hand it's very disappointing. On the other hand, you can hardly expect folks on the other end of the political spectrum to give up, and that's why, again, you've got to, the struggle is always going to be there, and that's why it's important not to get dismayed by it. And I think that's part of the reason why it's important to talk about things like this, where you can see the impact of what a group of students who were, you know, dismissed as young folks. Oh, these, you know, they don't know what they're doing. They accomplished something very real. It wasn't necessarily how they envisioned it, but they did change America. They did change universities and colleges. And I think it's important to see that, because it's important for everybody to recognize as they plan out their lives what it takes and to have an impact, and how long it can take sometimes to know that you had an impact. Other question? Yes, that question or straight up.
What would you recommend to
I didn't catch the last couple words. So the previous students' efforts.
The previous students' efforts won't be in a So what can we
read. Read. Now, you know, I mentioned this, and I teach, among the class I teach History 301, which is about historiography, and so it's for upper level, you know, it's people who are just getting into their junior and senior years in history, as majors and minors. And I reported to them feedback I got on one of those SOS forums, first year that I was here in 2006, from a student who, in the little short comment thing, wrote the comment that this course would have been pretty good except for all the tedious reading. You know, you're going to be a history major, you've got to be ready to read. But seriously, you have to. I mean, there have been in recent years, we're starting to see some serious rethinking of the civil rights movement on a number of levels. Thomas Segru recently published a book called Sweet Land of Liberty, where he takes a look at the civil rights movement in the North. We tend to think about it only as the Southern movement because we tend to focus on the shorthand. You know, Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, you know, bus boycott, March on Washington. And that's our image of it. Well, you know, there are other pieces to it too, and one of which is the contribution of young folks. Pick up, I've seen a couple of books about SNCC. One of the things that'd be really interesting, I think, to look at, there's a book, and this is a number of years old, there's a couple books by this title, but there's a book called Freedom Summer by Doug McAdam, and there's a more recent book, but this one came out, I think, in the 1980s or early 1990s. And he looked at the Freedom Summer, that movement, and I mean, it involved several organizations, not just SNCC, but SNCC really focused on Mississippi, where the heart of the really intense opposition was. I mean, they were like the shock troops. You know, we're going to go in there. We're young. We're energetic. We're going to fight the fight there. Well, okay, that's, you know, I talked a little bit about that. But when you talk about student protest in the 1960s, campus protests, that tends to get, most folks tend to look back and say that the origin of that was the free speech movement at Berkeley in the fall of 1964. One of the things I discovered in McAdam's book is that a whole bunch of those folks, including, I think, Mario Savio, who was like the voice of the free speech movement, had spent the summer of 1964 in Mississippi on the Freedom Summer campaign. And so they were being educated in political action, political activism at the in the very, you know, the summer just before they came back and started that movement. But that movement at Berkeley helped generate, you know, the anti-war movement among white students at a lot of college campuses around the country. And it was, to some extent, to some degree, inspired by what those folks learned, you know, working on the civil rights movement the summer before. You just look at books like Personal Politics by Sarah, I'm blanking on her last name, that she talks about the origin of the feminist movement, the radical feminist movement, you know, women's studies. The women who started really pushing for that had been involved earlier in the decade in the civil rights movement, and oftentimes in SNCC. Early on, SNCC was a biracial organization, and women started to discover, yeah, we're out here fighting for the rights of folks, and we're being disparaged and mistreated by the men in the organization. Stokely Carmichael made a very famous and disparaging comment when somebody asked what the position of women was in SNCC. He said prone. You know, a very demeaning comment. And so women in the movement, in the civil rights movement, faced discrimination. And that experience helped inspire them. Not necessarily, I mean, sometimes out of anger, but also they saw the approaches, the techniques. Well, how do you get grievances resolved? You confront them. You make demands. And so reading some of those, reading books like that, like Personal Politics, like you know, like books about SNCC. There's a couple others. There's I think Freedom's Children, and I'm trying to remember what the other one was. That both use like children in the title to talk about young folks in the civil rights movement that come out in the last several years. Do some reading. Find out about it. Other questions? Well, I I guess we've covered it. We're happy to hang around if you have any individual questions. I thank you for your patience. I thank you for coming, and hope it was in some degree helpful. Thank you very much.